Hi guys, welcome to the Reach and Inspire podcast. This is Urenna, your host. On today's episode, I'm sharing my journey of faith with you. I've titled this Why I Believe. This is part of a 3-part series where I share how I became a Christian, starting from childhood to where I am now. It's kind of a story about my life, really, so I hope you enjoy listening to it. Hi guys, welcome to the Reach and Inspire podcast. I'm Urenna, your host. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you my personal journey of faith. A few years ago, I did a 7-part Facebook post on why I believe in God and in Jesus Christ, and I had it all written down on my iPad. But one day, I dropped my iPad and it stopped working. Unfortunately, nothing was backed up. I know, silly me. And in the process of fixing it, they had to erase everything, and I lost all my notes. It was a sad time as I had so many unpublished material in there. Anyway, the good news is that this is my story, and thankfully, I remember it. It won't be a 7-part series, don't worry, but I think I should be able to cover it in 3 parts. But before I delve in, I'd like to share what I'm thankful for this week. This week, I'm thankful for the farmers. I love baking, and it's something my husband and I enjoy doing together. But recently, as you may know, if you're into baking, it's been extremely difficult to find flour anywhere. As most of the country are bored and learning new skills, i.e. baking, we ran out of flour, and I just couldn't find some anywhere. Thankfully, though, last weekend, my husband popped to the shops for something else, and he had a quick look, and lo and behold, he found some. So I'm thankful for the farmers that I know have been mega busy making sure that we get fed and have flour to bake things we probably shouldn't be eating, and basically just keeping up with our crazy demands, especially when we had that insane period of panic buying. So now to today's topic. I've titled this series Why I Believe, and this is part 1. So for those that don't know, I was born in Nigeria. I moved to the UK after my secondary school education, and I've been here pretty much since. Now, when I was about 4 years old, my parents moved to a city in Nigeria called Port Harcourt, which is in the Niger Delta part of Nigeria. We didn't really know anyone before we moved. I believe we moved for my dad's job, but my mom soon became friends with some of our neighbors who also had kids around the same age as us. Actually, thinking back to my childhood, I have to say that we probably lived in the best neighborhood for kids. All the families around us, and I'm talking multiple different streets, all had kids that were around the same age, and we pretty much all went to the same school too. So we had an abundance of friends and attended birthday parties almost every weekend. But anyway, I digress. As I was saying, my mom became friends with this neighbor who had a son around the same age as us. The lady and her husband were both Christians, and they went to a nearby Anglican church. They invited my mom along, and even though she didn't get too involved initially, they offered to take us to church along with them. So every Sunday, my siblings and I would cram into this family's car, and we would all go to church together. I must have loved it because I would get up early each day, and they only lived 2 houses away from us. So I could walk to their house on my own. I mean, these were the days when you could actually let your kids walk down the street on their own and not be worried that anyone would snatch them or do anything horrible to them. Anyway, so I would get up early. The first service in the church usually started about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would go to the neighbor's house. But sometimes I'd get there and they wouldn't be ready, or they wouldn't be going to church that day for some reason or the other. But guess what I did? Instead of heading back home, I would decide to walk all the way to church by myself. Now, honestly, I was around 5 or 6 years old. And thinking about it now, the church is probably only about 10 minutes walk for an adult. So for me, it probably took me about 15, 20 minutes or so, but I would go by myself. And then if the neighbors came after, I would come back home with them. And if not, I would come home on my own or with a group of people that lived in the same area. Now, honestly, it was not scary at all. Like I said, this was many, many years ago. I remember walking those streets, and yes, my mom, and my parents had taught us, don't talk to strangers and all of that stuff. But it was pretty safe. It was really safe. So, yeah, it was not a problem at all. Now, I don't know why as a kid I was so interested in church. And I use the word church rather than God, because I can't honestly say I really knew or understood the concept of God. Perhaps there was a social element to it. Going to church, I mean, I got to meet and interact with other kids, and I was out of the house for a few hours. That was always fun as a kid. But to be honest, now that I'm older, I think it was more than that. Now, looking back, I believe God was just drawing me to Him, drawing me to Himself, even if I didn't realize it at the time. So, as I got older, still a kid, I started to get more involved with activities for children at church. And I have to say that this Anglican church in Port Harcourt, it's called St. Matthew's Anglican Church. It's still there. I still visit whenever I go back home from time to time. They had a great children's church, or Sunday school, like we would call it. They had some amazing teachers that really taught us about God, really. But I would say at this point, I was still pretty young. So as I got older, I started to get more involved with activities for children at church. And I remember one children's harvest. So this is what we called it, children's harvest, but it's basically a special Sunday service for children, where you would bring gifts for donation to the church. And it would usually be shared, to families or to those in need. To be honest, at the time, I had no idea what it was for. But when we were much younger, we would bring food items, so things like rice, plantain, and other food produce. But as we got older, I remember it changed from food items to cash, presumably because of storage issues, but I don't know. But anyway, one of the best things for me at the time about Children's Harvest was that it was almost like show and tell for kids. So we would start rehearsing for this event, which it kind of was, in the church calendar. We would start rehearsing months in advance. And parents would be encouraged to let their kids take part, so it would be maybe on a Tuesday evening, you drop off your kid, they'll get involved in these activities in preparation for Children's Harvest. So kids would be chosen to act in a play or to sing or to do a reading, lots of different activities. But this particular Children's Harvest, I remember really wanting to act, because the drama was basically the highlight of the event, But I remember I didn't get any of the roles when they were picking, the lead actors and actresses or whatever. And as I sat there during rehearsals and watched the other kids getting picked, I remember being a bit upset that I wasn't getting chosen to play a role, in the drama. But then this teacher turned to me and she held out a sheet of paper with lots of words on it. And for the life of me, I can't remember what it said now. It's many years ago. I think at this point I was probably about 8 years old. But it was basically a Christian essay or a recital of some sort. I remember it had at least 3 paragraphs. It was a lot of words. And she asked me if I could memorize it and recite it during the service. And I was so excited for two reasons, I think. One, I'd been chosen and I'd been given this huge responsibility, or what seemed like a huge responsibility to me anyway. And I felt like this woman must have seen something in me to ask me to do this. Like I said, I think I was around 8 years old at the time. So, yeah, I thought it was a huge responsibility, and I felt honored, I guess, that I'd been picked to do this. Um, and I was the only one that had been picked to do this, by the way. And two, so the second reason I think I was really excited was because, and this is a bit selfish, I have to admit, but it was because I was going to be on stage all by myself. This was my opportunity to shine. So, anyway, I was so excited. I went back home. I memorized the heck out of that essay and I delivered it brilliantly, I have to say, on the day. I still remember seeing a home video of it later, and I was just so excited that I got to be on stage. It was a pretty big church, probably hundreds of people. And I was just really excited that I got, my chance to shine on stage. Um, so that was that, and that was basically how I started to get involved in church, and I guess in things, get interested in things of God. um and then as I got older, I continued, in that involvement. At this point, my mom especially kind of came to faith or became a Christian. And so she started, actively encouraging us to go to church, encouraging us to take part in activities. In the church that I went to, we had it was Tuesdays actually. It was like a Bible study for children or something like that. And so we would go after school, after we'd done our homework. Again, this same family with the son, um, we would all head to church together, and we would get taught, typical, your Bible stories. We would get, taught the Bible. We used to get involved in competitions amongst ourselves, but also competitions with other churches and their children's church. So we used to play this game. I remember called um, we used to call it draw your sword. But basically, in the Christian faith, the Bible is seen as, well, we see the Bible as the word of God, and is seen as a sword, because there's a verse in the Bible that talks about, God's word being like as sharp as a double-edged sword. And so we were encouraged to think of the Bible as a sword. It's basically something that, you use to fight, but not physical fight, obviously, more like a spiritual fight. And I'm going a bit deeper than I planned to in this episode, but I just remember I used to we used to have these games where we had to know different books of the Bible. There's 66, I believe. I hope I got that right. 66 books in the Bible. And we would have to really know where all these books were located, because you get told as part of the competition to locate a particular verse in the Bible. And basically, the first person to locate this verse and read it out, would win that point or that round or whatever. And so this actually, I'm very competitive. Like, if anyone knows me, in fact, I've become less competitive as I've gotten older. But as a kid, I was so competitive, and I used to love that, that game. And for me, that made me. I think that's actually one of the things that, made me get into like reading my Bible and just learning or memorizing all the books in the Bible, where they were. And then I even learned a song as a way to memorize them. And so even till now, I think because of those games we used to play, is why I'm very, I can find any book in the Bible, apart from the Minor Prophets, which I struggle with. But anyways, I can find most books in the Bible pretty easily. And I loved those games, those competitions. So this kind of was, I would say, the beginning of my journey of faith. Growing up in Nigeria, most people will tell you, and at the time, at the time I was growing up anyway, most people would say that they're either Christians or Muslims. In the north, we have a lot of Muslims, in the south, a lot of Christians, just as a general. So in the south where we lived, it was mostly Christians, and church really was just something that we did. Yes, they taught us about God and about Jesus and about relationship. But I think church was almost just part of our culture. It still is in some ways, I have to say. When I was growing up, there was no shops open on Sundays. And actually, I hear stories of the UK that's exactly how it used to be, many years ago. Sundays were seen as, a holy day. Shops went open, everyone went to church. And this is how it was when I grew up. This is how I experienced faith. I didn't know any different. So, two things I would like to point out that I remember from my childhood and from church experiences. One, there was a lot of talk about hell. And I have to bring this up because it's true. I was scared about going to hell. There was a lot of teaching about hellfire that it honestly scared me. And I remember having one or two nightmares and just thinking, I don't want to go to hell. So that wasn't great. Two, I remember an experience. I remember a kid in school, in Sunday school, that's kids' church, asking the teacher who created God. And the response the teacher gave was, we don't ask that question. And I remember as a kid thinking, even as a kid, I remember thinking, that doesn't seem right. Like, why can't we ask who created God? So, but I did, like any good Nigerian kid, you respect your elders, you don't ask questions. So I kept quiet. I didn't ask any questions. But that memory stayed with me. So yeah, that's where I want to leave part one of this episode. I know I'm going to keep you hanging, hopefully wanting to hear more. I hope you join me for part two, and I'll be sharing a bit more about my journey of faith. So I'll be talking about the teenage years and coming to the UK and what that did for my faith. So I have no challenges in particular on this episode, but just something I want to share. If you're a Christian, I want to encourage you to introduce the Bible, God, Jesus, to your kids at a young age. I've heard stories of kids coming to faith as little as 3 or 4 years old. I've also read somewhere that a majority of Christians, and I mean those that have made a conscious decision to follow Christ, do so before the age of 13, and they maintain their faith for the rest of their lives, pretty much, or into adulthood anyway. And I think that's incredible, but I'll pick that up on the next episode. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's a bit different today, I know, but this is something I really want to share, and I hope you enjoyed listening. Don't forget to rate, to like, to subscribe to the podcast, and share with your friends and your family too. Take care and God bless.